This is the tale of adventure. In the mid-adventure lies in the unknown. Our story is a silent drama of laboratories and factories of Canada. And the drama are part of the building of a vital link in the defense system of America, the Mid-Canada Warning Line. Joe Reed, a northern bush pilot since he was 18. Bob Packer, who gave up medical school to become a bush flyer. Both of them sold on the north, fascinated by it.
That's the Kannayapaska River.
A recognizable landmark, a matter of life and death up here. If Joe loses his place on the map, they could be lost in 5 minutes.
Bring her about 10 degrees to port, Bob.
They are flying over Ungava, trackless, except for the marks of wandering caribou, silent, except for the wind, and now the drone of an airplane. Joe and Bob are the first. Many will follow, for across 3,000 miles of the Canadian subarctic, a vast project is taking shape. In the region of the 55th parallel, a new type of aerial detection system stretches from the mountains of the Pacific coast to the rock-bound coast of Labrador. The Mid-Canada Line is an essential element in the joint U.S.-Canada Continental Air Defense Plan, which also includes the Dew Line, the Pine Tree Line, and connecting warning lines on both coasts. Based on Canadian research, financed by Canadian dollars, and engineered and built by Canadians, the Mid-Canada Line consists of a series of detection stations with towers, which stand as electronic sentinels linked by instant communication with defense centers of the continent. This new system was devised by the Defense Research Board and McGill University, working together. Responsibility for its establishment was vested in the Royal Canadian Air Force, with other government agencies filling important roles. Conferences were held involving engineers from industrial firms which were to build the electronic equipment, scientists from the laboratories where the idea was developed, and defense personnel. Management of all phases of construction and the setting up of the complex system of microwave communications was vested in the Bell Telephone Company of Canada, acting on behalf of the Trans-Canada Telephone System. The Bell Company set up a new department with engineers recruited from the telephone industry and from many fields, men with experience in electronics, transportation, construction, handling large contracts, and acquiring specialized personnel. Early decisions had to be made based on slim facts, for these men were faced with the problem of building a complex network across a land still almost unknown. This is the pre-Cambrian Shield. More than 1 million square miles of hills and lakes left by the cooling and buckling of a continent when Earth was new. A land that challenged the imagination of men like Hudson and Hearne 3 centuries ago, then proved so cruel that it was left, the haunt of polar bear, untreed and windswept. Monotonous muskeg, where the sun has gleamed unseen for countless centuries. Huge furrows, plowed by the scraping of gigantic boulders, the glaciers 2 miles. Such is the Canadian subarctic.
The first thing we had to do was turn to know every mile of the way across the Canadian Shield. This was no mean task, even on paper. We made up maps covering the whole area, and then proceeded to make a detailed study of the approximately on the line. In considering the site for the towers, we made a careful analysis of elevation and contour. On aerial photographs made by the Royal Canadian Air Force, we selected sites for towers as well as camps for the sighting crews.
Preparation for the actual sighting in the field includes layer of flight. These are the men who come to grips with the realities of building the line. After making a careful study of maps of the terrain to be covered each day, they survey the sites selected on the maps and make final decisions on the location of the towers. The long months of preparation and pre-planning are over. On the eastern half of the line, they work in 2 parties, using helicopters supplied and flown by the RCAF. They know where the towers should be placed according to all the reckoning and research that has been done. There has been consultation with geologists, weather experts, forestry men, and even the Canadian Wildlife Service. But the first man to actually examine the site for each tower is the sighting engineer.
We're above the permafrost line here, and the trees are stunted. Those spruce may be 100 years old. There's a carpet of caribou moss all through this country, maybe 2 or 3 feet deep. Makes a soft landing pad. It's very wet here because there's no drainage through the permafrost. The moss is a semi-fungus which gets its only nourishment from traces of mineral dust and carbon dioxide in the air. The individual lichens may be several hundred years old. As the branches grow, the lower part decays to form a spongy acid soil with little value. Foundation for a tower site would be difficult and expensive here. We'll move on a little farther to see if we can find a rock outcrop. The second party, meanwhile, has gone farther eastward to the next site. This is a sighting engineer's dream. A high point that looks as good in actuality as it did on the aerial map. They check the location for altitude and its geographical position in relation to other tower sites. Tolerances are small, and there are many things to take into consideration.
On the west side, in northern Alberta and Saskatchewan, the sighting parties work from helicopters of the United States Air Force. Here is a country of lakes and forests. There's not a space for miles where a helicopter could set down. There's only one way to get there. After he lands the Axemen, the pilot goes to the nearest hill to sit down and wait for them. This is dense young bush, spruce and jack pine, probably new growth after a fire. No one goes anywhere in the north, even for a day's work, without a sleeping bag. You never know what might happen. You notice the flies less if you keep working. As soon as the axemen have cleared enough space for a landing pad for the helicopter, they lay down a white cross to mark the actual landing spot. And they also plant a great nylon mushroom made from a discarded parachute with holes slashed to let the wind through. The parachute is securely tied to the tree stumps, and their job finished, the axemen call by ground-to-air radio, and another pilot brings in the surveyors. The parachute can be spotted from a great distance in the air, and soon another survey party will be checking off another tower site. The operation is still on schedule, but summer is nearly over, and the big push is on to finish the sighting before winter sets in.
Winter came, all right. From Cranberry Portage and Moosonee, scouts set out in bombardiers. The big problem was going to be how to get the supply across the Muskeg. One thing we had to find out was the depth of ice on the lakes. There are more than 2 million bodies of water here in the north. As we got to know more about this country, on the west side of Hudson Bay, we worked out a big plan. It was to take the supplies for the main operations across this country in winter. That's the only time there's enough solid ground to go 5 miles without hitting water. We'd need almost 3 feet of ice to take a bulldozer. It was 38 degrees below zero on that particular day, with a wind. Great weather for making ice. Good enough. Over in Quebec, there are plenty of lakes too, but the hills are high. There's only one way to get the stuff in over there. Fly it in. A DC-3 with a full load of cargo can land on about 2.5 feet of ice. They mark out safe landing strip with trees.
The great airlift is on. Supplies for next summer's operations are ferried out from the railhead at Knob Lake to depots along the line, and temporary receiving camps are set up. They pitch their tents on top of 8 feet of snow. In the damp cold of Labrador, with winds up to 100 miles an hour, the freight is unloaded. First and foremost, fuel. When every pound of equipment to build the final stations has to come in by air, lightness of the material counts as well as durability. As soon as the storm clears, the pilot takes off again, flying from dawn to dusk to move the thousands of tons of freight before the spring breakup. Meanwhile, in northern Ontario and westward in Manitoba, they break trail for one of the most hazardous transportation projects ever attempted. They say that cat-skinner Ray Beauchamp has a compass in his brain. Here are no landmarks, just snow and bush for 300 miles. A helicopter flies just ahead of Ray. From a few hundred feet up, the pilot can see difficulties which are out of Ray's line of vision. The copter may lead the way around a patch of bush or a rough defile by hovering and then taking off in the direction of a better road. Following the tracks of the cat comes a sleigh loaded with small spruce trees to mark out the trails. These swampy Cree Indian workmen make use of the oldest form of winter transport, their handmade willow snowshoes, to lay the trail for the newest, the tractor train. Meanwhile, up from Winnipeg, through the Pas and Flin Flon, up from the heart of industrial Ontario to Moosonee, up from Edmonton to Dawson Creek, supplies are hauled by rail. In the marshalling yard at Moosonee, materials for construction of the western half of the line are piling up. Here, where overland transport will be possible, the emphasis isn't quite so much on lightness as on strength and warmth. They move panels for prefabricated houses, lumber and structural steel, crates of cement for foundations. Always the diesel oil to feed the cat. All the component parts of the new settlement that will rise in the wilderness as soon as the frost is out of the ground. When the last load has been settled on the last wanigan, the tractorcade pulls out. Day and night the engines drone, and the runners creak on the snow.
It's 600 miles out and back. Takes about 10 days and 10 nights, depending on conditions. We never turn the motors off. Hardly a living thing out there. Last trip we saw nothing except one Arctic owl. He followed us for 3 days, watching for mice that were scared up by the tread. We work on shifts. Work 6 hours, sleep 6 hours. Pie 4 times a day, and steak for dinner every night. The stove has a fence around it to keep the pots from slipping off on the rough spots. We usually go 4 trains together, what we call a cat swing. The swing may be 1,000 feet long and carries 300 tons.
Hello, BTO. This is 510. 510, BTO, over. We're 20 miles north of the Attawapiskat, heading towards the north.
You're 20 miles north of the Attawapiskat.
Weather is clear and cold, 30 below zero.
Could you fly us up 100 pounds of meat tomorrow? 100 pounds of meat tomorrow. Over.
We'll fly to you in the Beaver in the morning. Will you make a check on the Ekwan River for tide water making slush?
A temperature much above zero for more than a few days would stop the train. We like weather of 20 to 30 degrees below to keep the ice hard enough to stand the continual pounding. Each train pulls a drag to pack the snow. The churned-up track doesn't build ice, and the trail gets soft. Sometimes we cross the shore ice of James Bay. We keep 1,000 feet apart in case of a breakthrough. But we like to stay inland a piece. Season's getting on now. Last trip we went 2 cat swings together. Got a heck of a lot more freight to move before the breakup.
Before the breakup in the north, the port of Montreal is open. Freight is piling up along the quay. Now another cargo route is open by sea around the tip of Labrador to Hudson Bay. Steel beams go aboard, too heavy to go in by air. Lumber to build new towns on high Precambrian hills. A vehicle to carry surveyors who work in the rugged country on the east side of Hudson Bay. 3 weeks after leaving Montreal, the ship anchors off the assembly area at Great Whale.
The bay is shallow here, so we have to use lighters, and we can only work when the tides and winds are favorable. We have no time to waste because the bay is only open a few weeks at best. Charts of these waters are not complete. and we had to take soundings before we could come in even this far. As it is, we figure we have only 5 minutes to get out if one of those sudden squalls blows up. This is one of our 300-ton days at Site 400. A good day. That's English, Cree, and Eskimo. The Eskimo reads, "Policemen say go away." The Eskimo tongue has no word for danger. To them, it is just a part of living.
At Weenus, an assembly area on the west side of the bay, until recently only a fur trading post, a tank farm has been built in readiness for the vast supplies of fuel. What was once a trail on the tundra is rapidly becoming a street as the new steel buildings rise on piles driven through the permafrost. The bay is so shallow here that ships anchor 10 miles from shore, and lighters can only come in with the highest tides. In the ancient sea bottom, a channel is being dredged for the lighters. Even in July, there is still ice out in the bay, and so a chain of beacons has been set up to guide the huge machinery when the fog rolls suddenly in. A mile and a half from shore, huge caissons are being sunk as a base for a giant causeway to carry trucks to and from the lighters. When the fog comes in, men and machines run for safety. They could be lost in 15 minutes in a world of white mist and mud.
Back at Great Whale, construction is well underway on the new airstrip and the administration building. We work from plans prepared in Montreal and based on a survey of the site. In the north, we must pay special attention to foundations. Sometimes we shoot jets of steam deep into the permafrost so that the piles can be sunk. Other times, we can find an outcrop of rock as a solid base. The Eskimos have caught on quickly to our construction methods. They are cheerful and efficient workmen. But while the Eskimos have received with enthusiasm the new kind of life in the camp, the pace of life in their villages hasn't changed. To them, everything seems an enormous joke. We are carrying out the government policy of encouraging them to retain their own traditional skills. Their simple carving in stone is now much in demand all over the world as outstanding primitive art. Their skill at hunting is necessary for survival. The little boys learn to throw a harpoon long before they are old enough to go on a whale or seal hunt. You know, we can learn something from them too. They have a wonderful optimistic philosophy and an understanding of how to live with the elements of the North. They have accepted our ways, and yet, because of the very nature of the land, they retain a great deal of the simple beauty and natural dignity of their way of life.
Summer has not lessened the activity at Knob Lake. The town that grew up around the vast iron deposits suddenly finds itself bursting at the seams with a new kind of urgent business. Men and materials pouring in from the south by air and rail. New warehouses, living quarters, and airstrips. Every available canso is pressed into service, ferrying fuel to caches that are being built up at the camps. Campsites are carefully chosen near large lakes, for the canso, with its extra fuel tanks in the wings, needs a long run of deep water. Wherever you need a lake in the Northland, you can find one. At Camp 227, the plane can come almost up to the shore. Quickly, the gas is piped out of the wing tanks into the empty drums. No self-powered lighters here. 3 or 4 round trips a day. No time to waste. It's September now, and one night of frost, ice over, and plague for nearly 3 months until the ice is thick enough to land on. No cranes or derricks here either, but the stockpiles are rolling up. From other camps where the big planes cannot land, helicopters shuttle back and forth, moving the precious fuel supplies. To other spots, fuel unloaded in dumps by last winter's tractor trains is moved by Cree Indians along streams where they track all winter. But there are other uses for oil drums in the north. Life in camp has its good points, mainly the food. You wonder what the flies lived on before we came up here. These boys know how to tackle the toughest part of life in the northern bush, the long evenings away from home and family. But whatever the hardships, when night falls, there's a feeling of mystery and grandeur that few can fail to sense. Fire breaks out at Knob Lake. Disaster strikes at the very center of the eastern operation. The living quarters are utterly destroyed, but most of the warehouses and equipment are saved. 200 men without food or shelter in a town with no reserves of either. Yet almost no time is lost in the overall plan. Provision is somehow made, and the work goes on. Men and supplies are on the move again. This winter, transport will be easier. The new airstrip at Great Whale is operative. The steel is up for administration buildings and mess halls, and living quarters are ready for occupation by technical staff. All along the line, permanent buildings are nearing completion. The towers and the actual stations are going up, new buildings designed and engineered especially to house the precious equipment. A labyrinth of wire and a jungle of machines. And yet each strand of copper, each delicate connection, is a part of a vast system. These are the visible channels through which information drawn from the air, unseen, unheard, and mysterious, is interpreted to become meaningful to men and is passed on to other men. When each station has been completed and tested, it is turned over to the Royal Canadian Air Force for administration. Across 3,000 miles, the microwave skywatch turns scooped ears to the winds. The movement of aircraft across our wildest Northland, or even the flight of geese on their annual migration, is detected. Information is relayed to defense centers. and if the need should arise, provision is made for the dispatch of interceptors. The farthest reaches of the continent are linked by instantaneous communication to its operating center. The Mid-Canada Warning Line. The challenge of its construction has been met in such a way that the Minister of National Defense has said,
"As a construction feat alone, this will have an impact on the development of the Canadian North, commensurate with that which the transcontinental railway lines had on the west at the turn of the century. We are pioneering the unknown. We are rolling back the map of Canada."
We've crossed the forest and muskeg and the lakes that are all that remain of prehistoric seas. We've left tracks on the tundra where no tracks were. We found Canadians with imagination and energy to do what has never been done. The northern skies are no longer an unknown frontier. With confidence in Canada's ever-growing strength, we look toward the dawn of a new day of peace under the Sky Watch on 55.